Welcome to Recap Pro Studios. Today we are going to explain a comedy drama movie named The Cobbler. Let's get started. Spoilers ahead. The opening scenes of the movie take place in the year 1903 somewhere on the Lower East Side of New York City. Several Jewish merchants visit the house of a shoe repairman named Pinchas Simkin. They were discussing about a European leader named Gergerman who has been threatening their businesses and harassing them. The older Jewish men seek the help of Pinchas to respond to Gergerman's actions. For that purpose, Pinchas receives a pair of Gergerman's shoes from the Jewish men. When the Jewish traders have left, Pinchas goes into a basement chamber and retrieves an old sewing machine. While Pinchas is sewing the Gergerman shoe soles with the machine, his son Herschel comes there and is surprised to see the old stitching machine. Pinchas tells Herschel that this sewing machine was gifted to his father by a vagabond in return for his kindness. Pinchas cautions Herschel to only use the unique sewing machine under specific conditions. The scene then shifts to the present, which shows the life of Pinch's grandson, Max Simkin, who has inherited his family's shoe repair business. In the morning, Max goes to his shoe repair shop. After attending to his customers, he goes outside his shop, where he watches a beautiful girl called Taryn with her boyfriend Emiliano. As he watches them, Jimmy, the owner of the barbershop next door, joins him and asks about his love life and also asks about his mother. Jimmy advises Max to start a family, soon finding a beautiful woman like Taryn. However, Jimmy, who is fairly close to Max, hears him complain about his modest life. After some time, a girl named Carmen Herrera enters the shop. She is a social activist from the Lower East Side Action Committee who asked local residents to sign a petition against a luxury real estate mafia who try to force out local residents. Max initially rejects Carmen's proposal, suggesting that he might be willing to sell his shop if the developers offer good money. But she inspires him with a speech about how his shop is part of what makes the town special. Carmen is able to persuade Max to sign on to local conservation initiatives, using her charm and an inspiring justification. After that, Carmen invites Max to a rally at night around the street for supporting an old man named Solomon, while a rich woman seeks to seize Solomon's apartment. After work, Max walks home. At home, he meets his weak and sick mother Sarah. Sarah's health has recently deteriorated and some of her memories have started to fade. She sometimes forgets that her husband Abraham left them years ago, and she constantly asks Max to call his father. The following day, a local thug named Leon Ludlow came to Max's shoe store and asked to have his shoes cleaned and polished. As Max cleans his shoes, he admires Leon's expensive-looking watches. Leon informs him that he has a watch collection at his home worth multiple times Max's shop. After that, Leon provides him with one more set of shoes to change its soles. Leon needs them done by this evening, before Max shuts the shop. During the repair, Max's sewing machine breaks down. He calls someone who can fix it. But that won't be possible till the next day. At last, Max goes to the basement of the store and finds his family's old shoe stitching machine used by Pinchas Simkin. He then starts repairing Leon's shoes using that old machine. Then Jimmy approaches Max and asks him what he is doing. Jimmy informs him that he has advised his father to make some money by selling the machine. However, his father Abraham dislikes giving things away. In the evening, Max closes the shop. He is awaiting Leon's arrival. Jimmy closed his shop and leaves. While waiting, Max picks up Leon's shoes, checks his shoe size out of curiosity, and discovers that he, like Max, wears the same size. Max then idly wore Leon's shoes, which looked expensive. Suddenly, a strange thing happened. Max's face changes into Leon's face. He turns into Leon. Max gets scared and removes the shoe. When he takes off the shoes, he returns to his original form. Max closes the door of the shop and tries it again. Max takes another shoe in the shop and wears it, but he doesn't change. So he goes back to the basement and uses the machine on other shoes to recognize its power. When he puts them on and looks in the mirror, his appearance has changed again. He realizes it's a magic machine. He sews more shoes and examines himself in the mirror as different persons. The next day, Max tests his new skill. He wears shoes at Jimmy's shop and teases him by pretending to be someone else to greet him. Jimmy doesn't recognize him. Max decides to make use of his newfound power by stepping into other people's shoes and living like them. Max walked around the Chinese market pretending to be a Chinese man. Then he wants to do something challenging. He wears another shoe and enters a pricey cafe, orders food, after eating, changes his shoes in the bathroom, and then exits without paying while posing as another man. Max then notices a rich man driving a luxurious car. The car owner is forced to give Max his shoes after Max threatens him as Leon the gangster. At night, Max puts on the rich man's shoes and has a good time driving around in the car. Max returns home happily and asked his mother what she wanted most in her life. Sarah expresses to him her desire to see his father, Abraham, once again. Abraham, Max's father, abandoned them some years ago. Max wants to make her happy by pretending to be his father. For that, he searches for his father's shoes that evening and takes them to work. The following day, Taryn, Max's neighbor and the attractive woman he adores, visits Max's shoe shop and asks him to fix her boyfriend Emiliano's shoes. Max makes the decision to utilize Emiliano's shoes to alter his appearance in order to date Taryn because he was captivated by her beauty. Max wears Emiliano's shoes and turns into a very handsome man. Then he goes to a bar dressed as Emiliano and gets recognized by several attractive women. One woman approaches him and they start to talk. The two of them enter a taxi. The girl asks where they could go. Max suggests they may go to his residence, but first, he needs to get his mother's permission. The girl seems disappointed and gets him out of the taxi. And on his way home, he is suddenly met with the real Emiliano. Soon he transforms back to his original form as he quickly removes one leg of the shoe. As Emiliano leaves, Max plans to visit Taryn at her apartment. Max rings the doorbell and Taryn lets him in. Taryn was in the shower. Seeing her boyfriend coming, Taryn kisses him and asks him to join her. Taking advantage of the opportunity without thinking, Max began to take off his clothes one by one. But when he was about to take off Emiliano's shoes, he immediately remembers that if he removes the shoe, he will turn back into himself. Max then says various reasons and runs away. The next day, Max meets Carmen. They had a conversation, and Carmen suggested he should come to her office later that day. Max seems attracted to Carmen. So he wears the shoes of a young boy and stares at Carmen outside of her office. That night, Max gets ready to make his mother happy. He puts his dad's shoes on and says hi to his father in the mirror. That night, Sarah is all dressed up and ready for dinner. Max walks into the room disguised as Abraham. Sarah couldn't hold back the tears and they share a special dinner together and then both danced passionately. Abraham remained by her side until Sarah sleeps. The following morning Max discovers that his mother has passed away in sleep. He organizes her burial. All the neighbors came to Max's house to express their condolences. Jimmy tried to comfort Max, who looked very sad after his mother's death. Jimmy tells Max that he was a good son. Max is back to work as usual. Leon then came to get his shoes. Max asked Leon for the token which Leon has lost. So Max didn't give up Leon's shoes. Leon becomes angry and threatens to kill Max. Leon immediately leaves the shop. Max, overwhelmed by the feeling of being threatened, intends to take revenge on Leon. Using several pairs of magical shoes, Max chases Leon down the street, disguised. Max's goal was to track down Leon's home and steal his valuable watch collection. Before returning to his apartment, Leon threatens some men and beats them up in a shop. After finding Leon's apartment, Max waits and observes until Leon departs. After Leon exits the building and enters his car, Max transforms into Leon with the aid of the magic shoes and goes to his apartment. As Max knocks on the door, Max meets Leon's girlfriend Macy. Macy, thinking she's talking to Leon, confronts Max about Leon's violent behavior and tells him she's finally leaving him for good. Once she has gone, Max searches the apartment. Max tries to find Leon's costly watches. He finds a bag full of guns and weapons and accidentally tasers himself. After falling unconscious, Max woke up several hours later. But as he attempts to leave the apartment still disguised as Leon, he meets the actual Leon at the door. The real Leon tries to beat up Max. But Max uses the taser to knock him out. Max then tied Leon to a chair. When Leon wakes up, Max, who has assumed the identity of a boy, asks where the watches are. When Leon won't answer, Max leaves the room and returns disguised as a transgender man named Marcia. Max threatens Leon with a taser and forced him to say where he had hidden the watches. Max finds the watches and puts them in his bag. But suddenly he heard a knock at the door. Leon says that it is his boys and they're all going to pick up $50,000. Then Max has an idea and pretends to be Leon again so he can get the money. He follows the goons as their boss Leon. They go to a place where the thugs are about to kill a man named Patrick for betraying them. Max stops the thugs from killing the man. Max asks Patrick to tell him sorry. He then urges his goons to let Patrick go. The gang looks on in disbelief. Although confused about the orders, Leon's thugs follow anyway. Still disguised as Leon, Max continues with the goons, and they go to the home of a slumlord named Elaine Greenawalt. She gives Max an envelope of money and tells him he will get the rest when the job is done. Max, of course, didn't know what work Leon and his men had to do. But he takes all the money. Both Leon's expensive watches and Elaine's cash is now in his hand. Max returns to Leon's apartment disguised as Marcia. But Leon has escaped and holds a gun to him. Max immediately took off one of his shoes, and Leon reels back startled as seeing Marcia become Max. They get into a fight, and in the process, Max stabs Leon in the neck with the shoe heel. Leon collapses to the floor dead. Max runs out of the apartment and goes home. The next day, Max surrenders to the police. The police doubt Max's wild story, however. After Max and the police arrived at the crime scene, Leon's body was nowhere to be found. The crime scene has been cleaned. Despite Max's protests, the police leaves. Feeling confused, Max goes back to his shop. To his surprise, he sees the stiletto heels and the blue bag placed on his table. Leon's money and luxury watches were also in his bag. Max gets even more confused and wonders who removed Leon's body and put his things in his shop. Max then grabs a taxi to return what he stole. Jimmy comes out to see him and asks what's going on. Jimmy warns Max that he saw this kind of strange behavior from his father Abraham shortly before his disappearance. Jimmy further explains that Abraham has left Max and Sarah because he got into serious trouble with some strange men and was forced to live his life as a recluse to save his family. Max gets mad at Jimmy for not telling him this earlier. He hit Jimmy for lying to him and tells him to stay out of his business. After that, Max takes on the form of Marcia and goes to Mrs. Greenawalt. Max returns the money to her, saying Leon sent him and Leon cannot fulfill the task. Greenawalt is not okay with this. So she asks her thugs to kill Max. Her goon, Brian, hits Max in the head. Later, Max wakes up in the back seat of a car and overhears Brian talking to another thug, Jeffrey, about setting fire to a home in Grand Street tomorrow night. Then Max slowly takes out another pair of shoes and puts them on. One of the men in the front seat notices a bad smell, and when they turn, Brian and Jeffrey are startled by the sight of a zombie in the back, and they scream out of fear and then lead to a crash. A group of children ask Max whether he's okay as he exits the car. Then they notice Max's face and scream as they run. One boy trips fearing he's a zombie and begs Max not to eat him. Max then removes his other shoe and assures the boy that he will not eat him. But the boy faints. Max returns home and decides never to use his ancestors' magic sewing machine again. He visits Jimmy's barbershop. He apologizes for what he did the other day. Jimmy says he also regrets never informing Max about his father's secret and chose to keep it a secret for years. In his shop, Max notices the leaflet that Carmen had left him about Mr. Solomon. It reminded Max about the conversation of the two goons last night. While he was being held captive by Mrs. Greenawalt's men, he had heard they intended to burn Solomon's property. Max goes to see Carmen and tells her of Mrs. Greenawalt's plan to burn Solomon's apartment. Max and Carmen visit Mr. Solomon to warn him. They try to convince Solomon to stay out of the house, but he refuses. Solomon says that he was not afraid and would never leave his house. Max had a thought, and he started to make a plan. Max borrows Solomon's shoes and leaves. The following day, Max encounters Mrs. Greenawalt in the form of Solomon. Max demanded a large sum of money to leave his property and also a round-trip ticket to Chicago so he could meet his daughter living there. Mrs. Greenawalt immediately agrees and says that she will send someone to escort him to Chicago. That evening, two of Greenawalt's men, Brian and Jeffrey, came to hand over Solomon's money and plane tickets. Disguised as Solomon, Max smartly steals their shoes and uses the stitching machine on them. Disguised again as Leon, Max enters the apartment building. Jeffrey spots him and follows. But when he walks into Mr. Solomon's apartment, he finds Max disguised as Brian sat in a chair. Jeffrey is confused as Brian is supposed to be escorting Mr. Solomon to Chicago. Max distracts Jeffrey and tasers him. Max, who is now using the form of Greenawalt's men, Jeffrey, contacts Mrs. Greenawalt and says that Solomon has left for Chicago. Mrs. Greenawalt arrives at the apartment building and confirms with Brian that he is still with Mr. Solomon. The real Brian was accompanying the real Solomon to the airport. However, when Brian arrived at the airport, Brian was even arrested by the police. Mrs. Greenawalt encounters Carmen leaving Solomon's building. Carmen says to her that she just visited Solomon. Mrs. Greenawalt rushed to Solomon's house, and Max, disguised as Mr. Solomon, was waiting for her. Max tells her that Brian was lying to her as he paid him off. Mrs. Greenawalt got angry and threatened to burn Solomon and his property. She also threatened to kill Solomon's daughter, who was in Chicago. But then, a reporter and cameraman came into the room. They ambush her with their recording of her threats to Mr. Solomon. Finally, Mrs. Greenwald was imprisoned. And Max successfully frees the community from the wicked slumlord. The next morning, Carmen comes to Max and asks Max how he did it all. But Max didn't reveal the secret. Then Carmen invited him to have dinner together, which welcomed Max happily. Now, disguised as Leon one last time, Max visits Leon's girlfriend, Macy, and gives her Leon's watches. Max apologizes to Macy and tells her she deserves better. After leaving Macy's apartment, Max, who is still using Leon's form, is captured by Patrick and his men because they want revenge on Leon. Max was locked in the back seat and they started driving, but suddenly Patrick's car had an accident, and when Max woke up, he was already at Jimmy's barbershop. Jimmy then said that he had saved Max from the accident. Jimmy says that he knows everything, then Jimmy revealed a secret. Jimmy sits down, slips off his shoes and becomes Abraham. Max embraces his father. Abraham says that he was forced to change his appearance forever to protect Sarah and Max, and it was he who removed Leon's body from his apartment. Abraham takes him to the basement to show him his extensive collection of shoes amassed over the years. Abraham reveals to Max that their family has been protecting the community for over 4 generations through the magical stitching machine. After that, Abraham took Max to another room with a luxury limousine and a driver ready to take them anywhere. Abraham proceeds to tell Max about the vagrant and how their family acquired the stitching machine as they drive off into the city. The story and the movie ends here. Thanks for watching, guys. And be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.